Good evening, everyone. Welcome to today's CP hours virtual CP hours meeting related to topic our that one capital gain related issue like fair market value 54C section deductions 54C. I first of all thankfuls Anil ji Yadav sir regarding to giving the big opportunity. First of all, I uh, First of all, I introducing our special guest, C.A. Suresh Garg sir, uh, Vimal Goyal, an associate past chairman of that, and also branch secretary, past branch secretary of also BJP Jaipur district converted economic cell and BJP Pradesh panelist of. I am welcome to our today's speaker, Siddharth Raka sir. He is FCA practicing CA 2004 to 2013. After that, practicing as a advocate. Also standing Counselor of Central Goods and Service Tax Central Excise Department before Rajasthan High Court, Punjabi High Court. He is past resident tax consultants association Jaipur and member, and also many organization member like All Indian Federation of many organization, All Indian Tax Rajasthan Tax Consultants Association. Welcome, sir. First of
Thank
all,
you.
I first of all I tell to Suresh Gar sir kindly introduce and also given your opinion regarding to today meeting, sir. Suresh Gar sir.
धन्यवाद दीपक जी।
हाँ सर।
आज मुख्य वक्ता सिद्धार्थ राका जी, ब्रांच चेयरमैन अनिल यादव जी और कोऑर्डिनेटर दीपक खेतान जी। मैं सबसे पहले तो अनिल यादव जी को बहुत बहुत आभार व्यक्त करता हूं कि उन्होंने मुझे इस प्रोग्राम के अंदर स्पेशल इंटरेस्ट के रूप में आमंत्रित किया। वैसे तो दोस्तों आज का जो विषय है वो कैपिटल गेन इश्यू से संबंधित है। मार्केट फेयर मार्केट वैल्यू, शेयर्स वैल्यूएशन अंडर सेक्शन 54 50F के डिडक्शंस के बारे में है, जो कि उसका विस्तार से सिद्धार्थ राका जी आपको सब विस्तार से बताएंगे। मैं तो सिर्फ इतना से कहूंगा कि अभी कोरोना काल चल रहा है, कोरोना की महामारी बहुत ज्यादा है। देश के अंदर 70 लाख के करीबन कोरोना संक्रमित हो चुके हैं। राजस्थान के अंदर भी स्थिति विकट है। देश की रिकवरी रेट 87% है, किंतु सोचने का विषय है कि जयपुर की रिकवरी रेट मात्र 64% है। आप देखिए हिंदुस्तान की रिकवरी रेट 87% है, लेकिन जयपुर की रिकवरी रेट मात्र 64% है। तो मेरा सभी से निवेदन है कि कोरोना से आप सोशल डिस्टेंसिंग मेंटेन करें, मास्क लगाएं और बार बार हाथ धोते रहें। ये खुद भी करें और दूसरों को भी करें, क्योंकि जयपुर की रिकवरी रेट 64% है, हॉस्पिटलों के अंदर बेड नहीं है। इसलिए दोस्तों कोरोना का विशेष ध्यान रखें। दोस्तों प्रधानमंत्री मोदी जी ने 20 लाख करोड़ रुपए का आर्थिक पैकेज घोषित किया था। उसके अंदर बहुत सारी स्कीम्स लॉन्च की थी। एक स्कीम में 3 लाख करोड़ रुपए एमएसएमई उद्योग को इमरजेंसी क्रेडिट लाइन स्कीम, उसके अंदर जो 29 फरवरी को जो भी आउटस्टैंडिंग है 50 करोड़ से नीचे तक है, उसको 20% का क्रेडिट लाइन स्कीम दी। उसके अंदर आज की तारीख में 1,87,000 करोड़ रुपए के लोन करीबन 52 लाख उद्यमों को सैंक्शन कर चुके हैं। मैं सभी दोस्तों से निवेदन करता हूं कि आपके जितने भी क्लाइंट हैं जिन्होंने इस स्कीम का फायदा नहीं उठाया है, वो कम से कम इस स्कीम का फायदा उठाएं, क्योंकि इसकी रेट ऑफ इंटरेस्ट बहुत कम है। 7.5% से 8% के बीच में ये लोन दिया जा रहा है। इसी तरीके से 2-3 और अच्छी स्कीम में अगर खाता एनपीए उसको रिस्ट्रक्चरिंग की, या आप अपने खातों को रीशेड्यूल, इसमें सब चार्टर्ड अकाउंटेंट की हेल्प की जरूरत होगी। तो मेरा कहने का मतलब यह है कि चार्टर्ड अकाउंटेंट अपने क्लाइंट्स की इसमें हेल्प करें। आज देश के अंदर आर्थिक देश के अंदर मुद्रा भंडार, विदेशी मुद्रा भंडार है, वो 546 अरब डॉलर के आसपास जा चुका है, जो किसी जमाने में 90 अरब डॉलर का विदेशी मुद्रा भंडार था। आज 1.5 साल के आयात के बराबर का हिंदुस्तान के अंदर मुद्रा विदेशी मुद्रा भंडार है। आप आत्मनिर्भर भारत के तहत मोदी जी ने महिलाओं के खाते के अंदर 2,81,00,000 महिलाओं के खाते में 2814 करोड़ रुपए ट्रांसफर किए हैं पिछले 6 महीने के अंदर। किसान सम्मान निधि के अंदर 1,82,00,000 किसानों के खाते में 4,987 करोड़ रुपए ट्रांसफर किए हैं। आप ये देखिए, ईपीएफ 24% का जो कंट्रीब्यूशन है, उसके अंदर 43 लाख के अंदर 2476 करोड़ रुपए ट्रांसफर किए हैं। उज्ज्वला गैस योजना, महिलाओं, गरीब महिलाओं को करीबन 42 करोड़ सिलेंडर मुफ्त में दिए, 9,700 करोड़ रुपए के। तो आत्मनिर्भर भारत के अंदर बहुत सारी स्कीम है। आप चार्टेड अकाउंटेंट हैं, अपने बहुत सारे क्लाइंट हैं, उनको समझा सकते हैं। अभी 10,000 रुपए की एक स्कीम है, जो कि आपके ऑफिस के या घर के अड़ोस पड़ोस में जो चाय वाला है, ठेले वाला है, वेंडर है, उनके लिए 10,000 की स्कीम है। उसमें आप एक समाज के रूप में एक उसमें हेल्प कर सकते हैं। आज इंडस्ट्री का जो मैन्युफैक्चरिंग है, पीएमआई इंडेक्स 56 आ चुका है। 50 से ऊपर अगर पीएमआई आता है तो ये माना जाता है कि ग्रोथ है। आज पीएमआई 56 है सितंबर महीने का, जो ये बताता है कि पिछले 8 साल के अंदर सबसे ज्यादा पीएमआई है वो सितंबर माह का है। इसका मतलब आने वाले टाइम के अंदर ग्रोथ होगा। तो मेरा अंत में जाके मेरा सिर्फ इतना सा है कि कोरोना काल है, सोशल डिस्टेंसिंग मेंटेन करें, मास्क लगाएं, हाथ बराबर धोते रहें या सैनिटाइज करें, और दूसरों को भी कराएं। धन्यवाद। जय हिंद, जय भारत।
धन्यवाद सर। सिद्धार्थ सर, आज के टॉपिक के बारे में सर डिस्कस करें सर।
Respected Suresh Ji Garg Sahab, Chairman of this session, Anil Yadav, Branch Chairman, Deepak Ji Khetan, Moderator of this session, and dear participants. First of all, let me extend my thanks to the branch for deciding that I could be one of the speakers for this 7-day income tax Pathshala. Friends, the speakers which have been decided by the branch, I can only say that once you have Parwal sir, Rajiv Sogani sir, Sandeep Jawar, Anup Bhatia ji, DP Mundra ji, then definitely you are having amongst the best possible minds, whatever little ability and capability that we have to share our knowledge with you. I am really thankful to Suresh ji for again reminding each one of us that we cannot take the COVID era lightly. Government is definitely trying its level best, but until and unless we also do not become part of the government's agenda, the government will not be able to successfully bring it to a logical control. Though I would be happy, and I'm sure Anil would also be very happy to hear from Suresh ji that the tax audit date, which is expiring on 31st October, and in advance intimation of extension comes rather than last week or last 2 days, only that we are able to know that the date is being extended. It is high time that the professionals who are attending their offices are attending their offices at great risk. I need not repeat, everybody is more than aware about the risk being carried by them when they are going to their offices and when their clients are coming to their offices for the purpose of audit. We are aware that how many of the clients are capable of helping us out in the audit, online audit facilities. We have, a lot of auditors have successfully done branch audit of the banks, but same is not the position with 80% of the remaining clients. It will be a very challenging time coupled with the GST era. So I'm sure government is listening. The government's ear is grounded, and timely representation equally from the Jaipur branch would be helpful, so that every chartered accountant or his office, they are able to plan their audit period. Coming to the topic assigned to me, friends, capital gains tax. Under the Income Tax Act, after the business income from business, this is one of the most specially focused chapters under the Income Tax Act for the purpose of taxation. These type of seminars, conferences, webinars, pathshalas is a regular feature of the branch, and the ultimate objective of the branch is updation of knowledge of each of its members. If I am able to present to you today this topic is based on the past experiences from senior professionals, senior chartered accountants that I was able to gather, that I am able to now in a position to share. And I am also very confident in times to come, you will also be invited by the branch to share your own knowledge and experience with other fellow professionals. Friends, Income Tax Act in itself is a web of provisions, starting from 5 primary chapters: income from salary, income from business profession, income from other sources, income from house property, income from capital gains. Apart from that, a professional, जैसे एक तीर में तीर कमान होता है, उसी तरह a professional needs to be updated about the provisions relating to NRI taxation, surveys, scrutiny assessments, appellate provisions, search assessments. Having knowledge about these primary heads of income will help you in carrying out your responsibility as a senior professional, because being a chartered accountant, a lot of thrust and trust is dependent upon you. Income Tax Act becomes complicated because of the various sections, subsections, provisions, clauses, explanations, judgments, amendments which could be prospective, amendments which could be retrospective, amendments which could be retroactive, are regular feature of the Income Tax Act. If we see various central statutory schemes like Indian Penal Code, right from its inception, or maybe even Indian Contract Act, Indian Partnership Act, maybe since its inception, not more than 2, 3, or 5 amendments would have been brought in. But when it comes to taxation, there is no year in which more than 40 to 50 amendments are brought in. So a professional has to regularly update about all the sections, amendments which are brought in. Then this Income Tax Act becomes more spicy because of various notifications and circulars issued by the Central Board of Direct Taxes. And apart from that, a professional not only has to look into the Income Tax Act, but also has to look into what are the provisions under the GST provisions and other allied laws, maybe like Benami Act and FEMA Act. All these have to be thoroughly read by the professional so that you are able to give best to your client. Also, an important feature of the Income Tax Act is the definition clause, which is contained under Section 2. These are important provisions. Once you are going to interpret any section or subsection, having knowledge about the definition clause is a must, in absence of which you will be, because a common sense may not be what is defined under the Act. Once, if anything is defined, first always have a look under the definition clause. Our professionals are also busy because they have to do the TDS returns, TCS returns, annual returns, SFT compliances, and I'm sure in the times to come, the CBDT or the Government of India is going to burden the business assessees. Business assessees representatives are chartered accountants in more and more compliances. The era of information which will be gathered by AIR returns or SFT returns, TDS returns, TCS returns is ever growing. It will further grow. We are all aware that recently only that TCS provisions have enabled for transactions where more than 50 lakh sale is done by an assessee, having overall turnover of more than 10 crores. So yes, there will be an always busy time for all the professionals, COVID or no COVID. Apart from, before coming to my topic, My topic has a lot of intricacies with other statutory provisions. Having some basic idea about these statutory provision is also a must. In isolation, you cannot study and read only the capital gains chapter. You are also required to know some statutory provisions relating to GST Act. Say, for example, there is a transfer of capital asset, whether GST Act would be applicable or not applicable. Then having knowledge about Companies Act or LLP Act is a must, because if there is a transaction which is happening per se of a shareholder or between the company or a transfer of management in case of unlisted company, then having basic knowledge about Companies Act, LLP Act, conversion processes from companies to LLP, from partnership to LLP, from LLP to company is a necessary tool that all professionals have to be aware of. Another important statutory provision is Indian Partnership Act, because now, as far as the capital gains chapter is concerned, on retirement of partner, there is a tax liability which is there. Having general knowledge about Partnership Act is a must. Then having some basic knowledge and fundamental clarity as far as Hindu undivided family is concerned, because a lot of exemptions are being talked about in the name of Hindu undivided family. You are to be aware that if a property is being sold by the SSE, whether it is being sold in the personal capacity or if the property is ancestral property, whether it will be treated as a Hindu undivided family. So you are to be very clear what is the basic ingredients of Hindu undivided family. Another important feature that professionals are supposed to be aware about is Rajasthan Stamp Act. Though on a day-to-day basis, a lot of time we as professionals say that इनकम टैक्स एक्ट में ये लिखा हुआ है, बाकी आप स्टैम्प एक्ट की रिक्वायरमेंट के लिए अपने कंसल्टेंट से अलग से मिल लीजिएगा. For that, I will suggest to all the professionals that whenever you have a time, have some knowledge and show some inclination towards the Rajasthan Stamp Act, some basic clarity about stamp duty. For example, under the Rajasthan Stamp Act, today, if there is a retirement of a partner, irrespective of the fact that he retains, at his retirement, he takes a property from the partnership firm, whether immovable or movable. To the extent of his shareholding, there will be a stamp duty liability in case the partnership firm is holding a immovable property under its domain. Whenever there is a question of tax planning, capital gains, some basic knowledge about Rajasthan Stamp Act is important. Similarly, the concept of Transfer of Property Act, part possession, when it is treated as transfer, when it is not treated as a part transfer, because any tax liability would always come when there is a transfer involved. And when we are talking about capital gains, then the concept of consideration is silent. What is most important is transfer. If the moment there is a transfer, irrespective of the fact that the consideration has been delayed, liability to capital gains arises until unless there is a waiver granted under the Income Tax Act, which I will, when I will do the slide, I will try to cover. Similarly, friends, you are also required to be updated about the NRI laws or the FEMA laws or laws related to non-residents. Because if your client is a buyer of a property, seller of a property, or a beneficiary of a property which he has received as a gift, whether he is a NRI or whether he is a resident, then you need to be aware what are the provisions, what are the requirements that one has to follow. Then when we talk about share transaction, Bhatia ji has already covered this topic. Some basic elementary knowledge about the SEBI laws is also very, very important. And last but not the least is the Trust Act, Charitable Trust Act, because under the Income Tax Act, there is a special provision for capital gains, like calculation of capital gains, unlike Section 45, there is 11(1)(a), So having some basic knowledge about Indian Trust Act would be always good. If a professional has the ability to always show the learning curve, then I'm sure there is nothing that can stop you in rising. Whenever you look into any specific provision under the Act, try to see the possibility that what all impact there could be under the different provision under the Income Tax Act itself, and after the Income Tax Act, what are the possibilities? I'm missing out here Benami provisions. Now, Benami provisions, when we talk about capital gains, when we talk about transfer of property, then it becomes very, very relevant. I'm not saying that each professional needs to have a mastery over all the provisions, but having some basic conceptual clarity on the subject would always be benefited and important. Now, what is capital gains? The first and foremost definition of capital asset itself is provided under the Income Tax Act, and which provides that any asset other than the exceptions provided would be deemed as capital asset. And what are those exceptions? Some of the exceptions are assets which we use on a personal basis. For example, you are having, or your wife is having, or your mother or father is having a car in their personal name, which is not being used for business purpose, which is a personal car. You have utensils at home, which are your personal use. You have rural agricultural land, which is, again, you look into the definition, depending on the area where it is situated, the population in which the land is situated. If it is agricultural land, if it is stock in trade, then these are assets which are outside the purview of capital asset. Other than that, so it is more like a notwithstanding clause, that other than these exceptions, whatever are possible assets will fall under the domain of capital asset. And the moment there is a transfer of capital asset, it will lead either to long-term capital gains or short-term capital gains. And at the same time, if you are receiving any capital asset, even as a gift, even you are receiving it from a non-relative, then it will be outside the purview of Section 56, which is the section under capital income from other sources. So before you need to understand Section 56, you also need to understand what is Section 214, which will be more clear from the next slide. Capital asset is broadly defined as property of any kind held by an assessee, whether or not connected with his business or profession. So in the normal course, when we talk about capital asset, we can talk about holdings like land, building, vehicles, patents, trademarks, leasehold rights, jewelry, investment in shares, mutual funds, and this can be an ever increasing, even ESOP received from the company. These are all part of capital asset. And what are the exclusions under the definition of 214 is stock in trade, consumable stores, goods which are held for the purpose of business or profession, personal effects like movable properties held for personal use, and rural agricultural land. Rural agricultural land per se is not outside the purview of capital asset. It is only rural agricultural land which is situated beyond a certain area, which will be outside the definition of capital asset. Otherwise, let us say you have agricultural lands situated right in the city area of Jaipur as well. It is not that all agricultural lands are outside the purview of capital asset. Only specified agricultural lands, rural agricultural lands, which are situated outside the municipal areas having a population of less than 10 lakh would be outside the definition of capital asset. Now, a lot of time, if you have clients who are having agricultural land, the normal question comes whether the provision of 56(2) or the erstwhile 56(2)(7)(b would be applicable. I am taking it for granted that we are all professional here in this talk. We are all aware about some basic concepts of taxation, and I am trying to touch upon the various updates. What are the latest amendments or what are the latest updates as far as these specific provisions are concerned? Section 56, friends, broadly defines that in case you are transferring any asset which is less than the DLC rate, then whatever is the DLC rate adopted by the sub-registrar, that value will be put in place for the sale consideration. Now, a normal query which comes into the mind is, suppose you have agricultural land. Let us say it is situated 40 kilometers from Jaipur. Now, the question is whether, and you transfer that agricultural land for 10 lakh rupees, and the sub-registrar values that land for 30 lakh rupees. Now, the question is, section 56 to 10 or 7B uses the language transfer of land or building. The normal query is that whether any land or building would be covered or there would be any exception. Now, the first case on this came to be decided against the SSE by none other than Jaipur Tribunal in the case of Trilok Chand Sen, where they held that even if you are holding an agricultural land, you are transferring an agricultural land beyond the definition of capital asset, even then section 56 to 7B would be applicable, and the difference would be payable by the recipient of the or the recipient of the purchaser of the property. Thereafter, this very judgment of Jaipur Tribunal in the case of Trilok Chand Sen came to be reviewed by the Pune bench of tribunal in the case of Mubarak Ghafoor Karabu, which after reviewing Jaipur Tribunal gave a dissent opinion, and then it said no. If it is agricultural land, it is outside the purview of capital asset, and the moment it is outside the purview of capital asset, it is outside the purview of section 56 to 10. And if it is outside the purview of 56 to 10, whatever value at which the DLC or the sub-registrar registers the agricultural land becomes immaterial. Now, both these two judgments again came to be reviewed by Jaipur Tribunal subsequently in this year, June 2020 and September 2020, in the case of Premchand Jain and Ram Prasad Meena, where now Jaipur Tribunal has reversed its own earlier view in the case of Trilok Chand Sen, and they have agreed with Pune Tribunal and have held that if the land is outside the definition of capital asset under section 214, then section 56 to 10 is not relevant. So friends, what is important is that the moment we read 56 to 10, it may give us an impression that any land or building, irrespective of its location, if the DLC rate adopted by the sub-registrar is more than the sale transaction, the SSE has to pay tax. However, that is not the case, and the latest development is that in case there is a difference in the DLC rate and the value at which the sale deed is registered, it is outside the purview of taxation, being exempt from the definition of capital asset. Now, there can be different classes of or different types of capital assets, like in case of an immovable property being land or building. Then there is a different time period for which it is held, depending whether it is a long-term asset or a short-term capital asset. The rate of taxation would change. In case of land or building, the minimum holding that you require is 24 months. Earlier, this used to be 36 months. Currently, now it is restricted to 24 months. So any land or building which you hold more than 24 months, it will be treated as long-term capital asset. The moment it is treated as long-term capital asset, then the assessees would also be getting the benefit of indexation. The second class of capital assets can be listed as listed share market shares, which are listed on Bombay Stock Exchange, National Stock Exchange. In case you hold those equity for minimum period of 12 months, then you can treat them as long-term capital asset. In case you sell them within a period of 12 months, then it is treated as short-term capital asset. Similarly, in case of unlisted shares, whether it is of private limited company or public limited company, In case it is unlisted shares, the minimum shareholding period required is 24 months. And like listed shares, where you have equity oriented mutual fund, the holding period is 12 months, whether they are listed or not listed. The minimum period is 12 months. When you have a debt oriented mutual fund, then the minimum period is 36 months. So friends, these are the different broad timelines that one needs to keep in mind while deciding the nature of tax liability which will come in the head of the SSE. Now, when we talk about listed equity shares, there are two rates of taxation which would come to the assessee's head, and accordingly we have to take a call which one we have to opt. In case the security transaction tax has been paid on acquisition and transfer both, then you are eligible, you pay 10% straight without any indexation benefits. In case there is a long-term capital gain up to 1 lakh, that remains to be exempt. But in case there is capital gain which is more than 1 lakh, then it is liable for taxation. Simultaneously, in case you are having long-term listed equity shares, where on purchase of those equity shares, no STT was paid, or even on transfer, no STT is paid, then you have two options: either pay 10% without indexation or pay 20% with indexation. Then you do not get the benefit of 1 lakh exemption. The entire capital gains with indexation or without indexation would be subjected to tax. Very, very important topic is what happens in case you convert your capital asset into stock in trade, or vice versa, if you convert your stock in trade into a capital asset. Say friends, for example, you are having some equity shares with you, or you are having a land with you, and you decide to exploit it for business purposes. Then that will be treated as conversion of capital asset into stock in trade. Now the Act doesn't require you to pay the tax at that very moment when you decide to convert the capital asset into the stock in trade. The requirement is whatever is your purchase price, and when you decide to convert this into stock in trade, whatever is the stamp fair market value of the asset on that day, the difference will be treated as capital gain. Now, depending on your holding, it can be long term or it could be a short term. You calculate your capital gains, but only when you further transfer that stock in trade, when you sell that stock in trade and you receive the consideration, in that year, both the liabilities would be required to be paid: income from business, that is the difference on the fair market value and ultimate sale consideration, and also the capital gains which was determined at the earlier point of time. It is to be paid at the time of consideration and not at the time of conversion of capital asset into stock in trade. So for example, you have a land which you decide to convert into a complex, or your client decides to convert into a complex. Let us say it was purchased in the year 2001 for rupees 10 lakh. In the year 2020, its value is, let us say, 1.5 crores fair market value. And you decide to convert this into stock in trade, vacant barren land. In friends, between 10 lakh and 1.50, whatever is the difference after taking the benefit of indexation, calculate. Let us say the long-term capital gain is calculated at 1.3 crores or 1.2 crores. 30 lakhs is the indexed cost. This 1.3 is not required to be paid right now in the year 2020. Subsequently, 3 years, 5 years down the line, when you develop the property and you sell the property, in that year, also pay the tax on 1.3 as well as the business profit. The reverse is not true. So when you are converting your stock in trade into a capital asset, the year of taxation would be the year when you decide to convert. So for example, you are holding a agricultural, or you are holding a stock in trade, you are doing a real estate business, and you are a builder, you are having 4 flats which you have decided to not to sell, and they are being maintained in your stock in trade for let us say for 5 years. And you ultimately decide to abandon the business of real estate business, then you decide to convert it into the capital asset. So depending on your stock value and the fair market value on the day of conversion, whatever is the difference. So if your stock in trade value is 1.5 crore and the value as per DLC rate is, let us say, 2 crores, in the difference of this 50 lakh rupees, you have to pay tax the moment you decide to convert your stock in trade into capital asset. Whenever you subsequently sell this capital asset, from that point of time, the period of holding for short-term capital gains or long-term capital gains would be independent. The period prior to conversion will be ignored. So it is very important to remember, when you are converting capital asset into stock in trade, you can also postpone the liability of income tax. But when you have decided to convert a stock in trade into a capital asset, the tax liability would be paid then and there in the year when this conversion takes place. Now, Suresh ji has just shared with you that the government of India has done a 22 lakh crore pumping in the economy. The forex reserves are at all-time high. But friends, the fact of the matter is that you are also having a lot of interaction with your clients, and you are finding that most of the clients are grappling with cash flows. Now, these cash flow are one of the major thing that the government has to look into, because of the various provisions which were brought in over a period of last 5-6 years, whether it be it Benami provisions, whether it was tightening under the provisions of the Companies Act, whether it was the tightening under the income tax itself, where group transactions were restricted. The domain of Section 56 was tightened very much. 64, all these were tightened. Intra-group transactions are not that easy. So this has led to a genuine, and even when we talk about informal amount being taken from the market for as a loan and everything, which is now not that easy. So a lot of these clients are grappling with cash flows. And we have to be very, very clear, because the client comes to you that, sir, I have sold the property to repay my loan. Now I don't have the money. What do I do? And then as a professional, we try to go into some window dressing. We try to inflate the purchase price here and there. So as a professional, we need to be very, very clear what we are dealing with. Times are not as they used to be. Whether it is Money Laundering Act, whether it is Benami Act, professionals, you are seeing a lot of these GST raids happening at the doorstep of the professionals also. Whatever advices we are giving to the clients, we need to be very clear. We need to be very straight with that. In case there is a forfeiture of any advance money which has been received by your client, suppose there is an agreement of sale which has been done by him, and that agreement of sale has a forfeiture clause that in case the remaining sale consideration is not granted within a period of so and so period, the advance money which is given by the buyer will be forfeited. And if that is acted upon, then that will be treated as income from other sources under Section 56(2)(9) after assessment year 15-16. Prior thereto, this forfeiture used to be reduced from the purchase value itself, and there was no incidence of taxation. So now onwards, in case there is any forfeiture, then it will be outside. It will be within the ambit of taxation, though not under the ambit of income from capital gains, but under the ambit of income from other sources. But if it is a forfeiture of agricultural land, I think in light of Section 214, it will remain to be outside the purview of income from other sources as well. Coming to an important topic of Section 50C, as I've just recently shared, 50C deals with and major litigation in capital gains or the additions or the notices which are coming from the income tax department is in light of variation under the Section 50C, that is value at which the property is registered by the sub-registrar and what is recorded under the sale deed. Now, my friends, you should also be aware that this information can come to the income tax department subsequent to the date of registry. Under the Stamp Act, once a document is given for registration before the sub-registrar on prima facie basis evaluates the value of the property and hands it over to the buyer. It could be a case that after 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, the audit wing of the stamp department itself reviews those registries and comes to this conclusion that the value at which it was disclosed is not correct and it needs to be recalculated. So suppose your client has sold an agricultural plot or a residential house adjoining a commercial complex or a petrol pump. Now, at the time of registry, the sub-registrar might have valued it as a residential house, and then your client might have come and said, okay, this is the value at which it was transacted. And 2 years down the line, 3 years down the line, department comes to know that the stamp department has itself increased the value of the property. And at that time, your client is unaware. So you need to be aware about Section 50, Section 50C, Section 155 under the Income Tax Act. The assessee could be burdened with the proceedings under 148 also, because there is no time limit under the Stamp Act for revision of this valuation. So under the Income Tax Act, officer generally cannot go beyond 6 years, but under the Stamp Act, there is no time limit prescribed. Now, the statute itself provides some cushion to the assessees. From this assessment year 2021-22, if the DLC rate vis-a-vis the stamp, the sale consideration is within a cushion of 10%, then that 10% will be accepted and it will be ignored. In case it is falling within that 10%, then it will be ignored and whatever is the sale consideration, that will be accepted. Prior thereto, there was a variation of 5% which was provided under the statute itself as a cushion, which has been increased to 10% as I submitted. Now, when this 5% was brought in, it was held by the Kolkata Tribunal that it will also, prior to 5% being brought under the statute, earlier the statute had no cushion. So the tribunal have always come to the rescue of the assessees and they've said 5 to 10% is a variable, a possibility which has to be accepted. And in case it falls within the 10%, no addition can be made. Jaipur Tribunal, various tribunals which have consistently held this, if the difference between the DLC rate and the value adopted by the sub-registrar is less than 10%, then that 10% has to be ignored. So Section 50C, now what was being given by the tribunal, the statute itself also recognizes that. If you are facing a dilemma, or your client is facing a dilemma, that under Section 50C, transfer of capital asset, or 43CA, transfer of stock in trade, or even in a case of a buyer 56(2)(10), where there is a difference between the value adopted by the sub-registrar and what is recognized under the sale consideration, and you are pitted with a dilemma how to deal with this situation, then friends, you need to sit with your client, try to identify what are all the negative covenants or negative aspects of the property due to which this value has been recorded less in the sale deed and adopted more by the sub-registrar. You can look into whether the width of the property is narrow or big, because stamp department ignores the width of the road. And broadly it says main road and interior road to the main road will have the same value. But in real scenario, in practical scenario, the property which is situated on the main road vis-a-vis property situated adjoining the main road will not have the same rates. Similarly, what are the nearby areas under which the property was situated? Are there any cases, litigations, public interest litigations going on? Is the property converted, not converted? What is the use of the property? You sold the property as an industrial land. You sold the property as a residential land. But subsequently, the stamp department converts this, or as far as the valuation is concerned, the stamp department values it as commercial property. So there could be a skyrocket change in the valuation. So you need to understand, ask your client. The client needs to talk to the counsel who had done the registry of the property, take out the valuation from the sub-registrar's office, and try to identify what are the reasons why these differences are there. Then the area, the location of the property. If there was a prior agreement 3 years back, 2 years back, whether there was no prior agreement between the buyers and sellers, whether it was a distress sale in a sense that your client is going through acute liquidity problems, or his account is under NPA, or his account is under question, and that he's under distress to sell this property, or there is a big family dispute which is there between the family members, on account of which there was a requirement to sell the property. Whether the adjoining areas, now for example, we are in the COVID times. If you see the real market scenario, everybody knows that there is a reduction in the real market price of the property. But when it comes to the stamp department, you will realize that they have hardly touched the valuation of the property. So irrespective of COVID or no COVID, probably only 10% rate was reduced, whereas the reality is that in large areas, practically where it is a reference of commercial property, when it is concerned with agricultural property, you will find that the DLC rate is far higher than what is the actual price at which the property is being transacted. So try to identify what are the increasing or decreasing trend in the vicinity areas. Then you need to identify the age of the property. The stamp department ignores the age of the property. Suppose you are selling an old house which was constructed, let us say 30 years back, 40 years back, and it has a construction area of 4,000 square feet. The stamp department is going to apply an arithmetic formula of 5,000 square feet into 800 rupees as the value of the construction. Whereas in the real sense, that construction value will be negligible, and between the buyer and seller, this construction value would not be something which they have decided. So you can point out what are these things which I have just highlighted. When you're making your submissions before the assessing authority or the DVO, you can highlight these issues which can lead to reduction in the 50C valuation. Similarly, how many owners were there in the property? Say, for example, the property is situated in the four-walled city. It consisted of more than 4 brothers, 5 brothers. So until and unless all the brothers agree, the property cannot be transferred. So the more the number of owners, the likelihood of fetching the real price would be less. Similarly, if it is a rented property, or there are disputes in relation to the property between the tenant and the landlord, between brothers or sisters, all these things need to be very clearly known to the professionals before any submission, either to the assessing officer or to the DVO can be given. Jaipur bench in Vimla Devi Samaria has said that if the DVO is valuing the property, then he cannot ignore the comparable sale instances given by the assessee. He has to give reasons why he is ignoring the comparable sale instances. And he cannot also rely only on DLC rate to justify that this is the value of the property. So for example, let us say in this case, the DLC rate was determined by the sub-registrar at 3.5 crore. And the value at which this transaction took place was 1.5 crore. When the assessee went to the DVO and gave all the negative covenants, for example, there is a gas pipeline going beneath the property, and the property is not square or rectangle, tedi waki zameen hai. All those were ignored by the DVO, and he simply referred to the DLC rate, gave a multiplier, and gave the valuation to the assessing officer. The tribunal held no. DVO's job is not to become the second sub-registrar. He has to actually find out what are the negative factors involved in the property, what are the positive factors, and then come to a valuation. And as far as the valuation is concerned, it is only binding upon the assessing officer. But when it comes upon the CIT appeal or the tribunal itself, the tribunal can ignore the valuation done by the DVO. It it can go into the specific instances or the reasons, what are the negative reasons for which this property needs to be downgraded or the value needs to be downgraded. And they can independently, irrespective of value worked out by the DVO, calculate the or put the value as far as 50C is concerned. Now, Delhi High Court in Modern Lease House has gone ahead to say that in case the assessee asks for or asked that the matter be referred to the DVO and the assessing officer ignores the request of the assessee, then it is an illegality committed by the AO, and the entire exercise or the entire addition made by the assessing officer needs to be deleted. Number one. Number two, it is not a case that in case there is a mistake committed by the assessing officer, let it go back to the assessing officer, because the Delhi High Court says, sorry, no second inning permitted to the assessing officer. They cannot take advantage of their own mistakes. So it is very important, friends, in case there is a 148 proceeding or even a regular scrutiny proceedings, and there is an issue with regards to 50C, take your chance for referring the matter to the DVO. Do not ignore that valuable right. So the question under 50C is whether it is applicable on transfer of land or building, or also on transfer of rights in land or building. So the clear law which has now developed is that under 50C, it is only transfer of land or building on which the tax liability would be there. But if simply stated there is a transfer of rights in the immovable property, then that section 50C will not be applicable. Now you will be amazed to find that there are certain overlapping provisions under the Income Tax Act. Like for example, section 50C and 11(1)(a). 11(1)(a) is a section which is applicable for charitable trusts which are registered under section 12AA. Now, if a charitable trust, let us say Agarwal Education Samiti or any client of yours which is a charitable trust, and it transfers a land or building which it is holding, which is less than the DLC rate, the client will come to you ki, I have done this transaction, sub-registrars have valued it at 1 crore, whereas I have received a sale consideration of only 50 lakh rupees. Now, whether this 50C would be applicable or 11(1)(a) would be applicable. Because friends, once you read section 11(1)(a) under section 11, then you will see that how the tax on capital gain is to be paid is specifically provided under the section 11 of the Income Tax Act. Now, when the issue first time came up before the Lucknow bench of the tribunal, in the case of Upper India Chamber of Commerce, then the tribunal held that there cannot be two deeming fictions. 11(1)(a) itself is a deeming fiction. 50C is also a deeming fiction. So once we are dealing with tax calculation under section 11 of a charitable trust which is registered under 12A, then that provision itself is more than sufficient. No one needs to go to section 50C, and the tax liability has to be calculated as per 11(1)(a). So Upper India technically held that in case of a 12A trust, in case they are doing a transaction where the DLC rate is even more, that difference has to be completely ignored and it will not be relevant at all. Now, this issue came to be considered by Jaipur Tribunal very recently, about 3 months back, and it disagreed with the view of Upper India, and it said that irrespective of the fact that whether you are a charitable trust under section 12A or not a charitable trust under 12A, the provisions of section 48, 49 would be deemed to be read into section 50C. Whatever is the value adopted by the sub-registrar, even in a case of charitable institution, that will be the basis on which the value under 11(1)(a) would be brought in. So a complete turnaround, two different views, one by Lucknow Tribunal, which was prevailing for more than last 5-6 years. Jaipur Tribunal has come up and it is said that no, 50C is not 50C is equally applicable in case of charitable trust. So you will find, friends, at a lot of time once you are doing a study of any provision, when your client comes to you, you'll find contrary views. There are articles which you will find that gives another impression. There could be a tribunal order, there could be a high court order, non-binding order. So it's no doubt a big dilemma for a professional to give a right advice to the client. But being from Jaipur, being from Rajasthan, and being the jurisdictional tribunal, as far as we are concerned, the Bharatpur Royal Family Trust, which is the latest tribunal judgment, holds forth, and it says that this trusts are also coming under the provisions of Section 50C. Prior to Section 56, there were instances where there was difference in the sub-registrar value and the value adopted or reflected in the sale deed. Now, the assessing officers, in the case of the buyers of the property, took this difference as and made the addition under 69(b). Now, this has been held to be illegal and has been held that simpliciter, because there is a difference between the value adopted by the sub-registrar and what is reflected in the sale deed. As far as buyer is concerned, buyer is out. Seller is governed by 50C. Now, again, friends, talking about the erstwhile provision, now you have direct Section 56 and earlier 7B, which also covers the buyers. So buyers are equally covered under 56 and sellers are covered under 50C directly. Now, another case of two deeming fictions, overlapping two deeming fiction, is contribution of asset to a partnership firm. Now let us understand the situation where a partnership firm is being sought to be created by three partners. One of the partners is contributing his personal immovable property in the partnership firm as a capital asset of or as an asset of that partnership firm. And the remaining two partners decide to bring liquid capital to develop the property. Let us understand a situation where one partner is contributing property or land or as an asset of the firm. Remaining two partners decide to bring in the liquidity to develop the property. Now, Section 45(3) says that whatever is the value recognized in the books of the partnership firm, that will be the value at which the capital gains in the hands of the partner will be worked out. Now, 50C says no. 50C says whatever is the value worked out by the sub-registrar, that will prevail. So, for example, your client has converted some property into contributed a property into partnership firm, and that partnership firm, in light of the Stamp Act, has got itself registered before the sub-registrar also. Now, in the books of partnership firm, let us say you value this property at 1 crore, whereas sub-registrar values it at 2 crore. The normal question would be that now at what value the tax has to be paid, whether it will be calculated at 2 crore looking at Section 50C, or whether it will be calculated as per 45(3) at 1 crore only, which is the value recognized by the partnership. Now, there are already judgments of High Court and tribunals, one in the case of Amar Tara and one is Moti Ramanand Sagar, which they say that the basic interpretation of taxation does not envisage deeming fictions within deeming fictions. Hence, 45(3) being a specific provision in reference of a partnership firm will prevail over general provision of Section 50C, and accordingly it was decided or held that whatever is the value recognized in the books of the partnership firm, that will be the value at which the partner has to pay the income tax, or as long-term capital gain or short-term capital gain. Again, friends, this principle is deviated by Jaipur bench, as I just recently shared in the Bharatpur Royal Family. That matter is now pending before the Rajasthan High Court, needs to see the light of the day. Now, suppose you are transferring leasehold rights. You are a tenant in the property. You are transferring your leasehold rights in the property. Whether Section 50C applies to you or not. As far as Rajasthan is concerned, a view against the assessee in the case of Ramji Lal Meena has been taken. Other than Rajasthan, broadly in the case of Greenfield, HETEX, Bombay Tribunal, Bombay High Court have held that in case of rights in the property, Section 50C is not applicable. Unfortunately for us, there is a contrary.
Hello. Hello.
I think का नेटवर्क कनेक्शन हो गया कोई
सुनता हूँ सर मैं।
है ना। एक बार यहाँ तो सर अभी मैं एक बार कॉल करता हूँ, एक बार सर अभी ज्वाइन कर लेंगे। टेक्निकल इशू।
नहीं सर, आप कॉल कर रहे हो क्या उनको?
डिस्कनेक्ट हो गए।
हाँ, सॉरी फ्रेंड्स, कुछ टेक्निकल प्रॉब्लम्स आ गई है सिद्धार्थ सर के वहाँ पे, तो विद इन 1 मिनट ही विल ज्वाइन अगेन। तो आई थिंक मीनवाइल आपकी और भी कोई क्वेरीज हैं तो प्लीज आप दीपक जी के चैट बॉक्स के अंदर आप शेयर कर सकते हैं। तो आफ्टर सेशन वी विल कवर ऑल ऑफ क्वेरीज। आ गए, ज्वाइन कर लिया है सिद्धार्थ सर ने ना।
Am I audible and visible now?
Yes sir, yes sir, yes.
Sorry, there was some connection problem as far as I am concerned. Sorry. Sorry, friends. So I was on to the topic with regards to minimum alternate tax in case of transfer of rural agricultural land. Would it be, though you are outside the purview of Income Tax Act, you are outside the purview of capital gains, whether, and even this agricultural land is not held as stock in trade by the SSE, and it is purchased for investment purpose only. The question is whether MAT would be applicable or not. Rajasthan High Court in the case of Krish Homes has confirmed the earlier view of the tribunal that on transfer of this agricultural land, be it rural agricultural land, MAT would be payable. Now subsequently, Jaipur bench in the case of Moti Sons Buildtech has taken a different view, and it has held that even MAT would not be applicable on such transfers. So you will find, friends, that there is always a development of various provisions, and under the various views are being expressed by tribunals and High Court, which are different. Another query which comes regularly is that in case there is a private limited company or a company and there is a difference under section 50C, whether that difference is also relevant for purpose of calculation of MAT, liability under minimum alternate tax. And again, the consistent view of the tribunal is that being a deeming fiction, another deeming fiction cannot be read into that, and no MAT liability would be applicable in case of difference in case of 50C. Now, this very principle will also be relevant for a company which is dealing into real estate and where the difference under section 43CA is there. So because of 43CA, his income tax liability can be increased, but not the MAT liability. That may be kept in mind. An important provision after 50C is 50CA, where you are transferring unlisted equity shares. Then after the Finance Act 2017, you cannot transfer those unequity quoted shares for consideration which is less than the fair market value. Under the rules 11UAA, it is the date of transfer. You have to take a valuation report. It cannot be less than that. And 50C is not applicable when the stock is held as stock in trade. Only when the stock is held as a capital asset is that 50C applicable. Now, like 43CA, like 50C, where the Act itself permits a safe harbor of 10%, that cushion of 10%. Friends, remember that 50CA does not provide any cushion. But I am very confident in times to come, whenever this provision is interpreted by the assessees, in case there is a difference, 5 to 10% benefit like earlier 50C will be granted even in case of 50CA. Now, how the shares have to be valued? Now, there are two important provisions under the Act. One is section 56(2)(10), which provides that the valuation has to be done as per rule 11UA. And the second, which I've just read out, is 50CA, which says as per rule UAA. UAA doesn't have any independent methodology. It refers to 11UA. So in sum and substance, it is 11UA which is relevant. And under the provisions of the Income Tax Act, there are two methods of valuation which is provided. One is the NAV value, and the second is the discounted cash flow. Now, when it comes to valuation, a normal chartered accountant can value or provide a valuation under the NAV method. But the discounted cash flow method certificate can only be given by a merchant banker registered with SEBI. So keep in mind, friends, when you are giving a valuation certificate, if you don't have a merchant banker certificate, then you cannot give a valuation certificate for discounted cash flow. You can only give a valuation certificate for NAV. Now, when you value the asset at NAV, then within NAV, there are different class of assets like jewelry, artistic work, shares and securities, and immovable property. These have to be valued at fair market value. And fair market value, you take a registered valuer certificate for their valuation. And the simple and normal methodology that we are all aware, assets at fair value, add the assets at book value, remaining assets at book value, reduce the current liabilities and unsecured loans, secured loans, and the remaining amount is the net asset of the company divided by the number of equity shares issued to arrive at fair market value per equity share. Now, as far as discounted cash flow certificate is concerned, that can now only be issued by a merchant banker registered by SEBI. Issue came before the Jaipur bench of tribunal that assessee having a certificate of a merchant banker under DCF, whether assessing officer can go into the correctness of that valuation. And the Jaipur tribunal said that the assessing officer cannot go into the valuation, the basis of valuation which has been given by a merchant banker, and he cannot convert on the NAV. He has to accept whatever is being given by the merchant banker. And tribunal ITAT Bangalore also held that in case the valuation certificate is given by a wrong valuer, then that can be ignored by the assessing officer. As long as the valuation certificate is by a merchant banker, that is accepted for DCF purposes. Coming to deductions under the chapter capital gains, first and foremost, section 54, benefit can be taken only by individual or HUF. The asset which is transferred has to be a residential house property held for a period which is long term, which is more than 24 months. Amount to be invested will be the capital gains portion and not the consideration portion. Suppose the indexed cost is 50 lakh rupees and the sale consideration is 1 crore. Then the assessee needs to reinvest 50 lakh rupees in order to make the capital gains zero, not the entire 1 crore. Now he can invest in one residential house. Now he can invest up to 2 crores in 2 residential houses as well. And then he has a time limit of 1 year, but prior to the transaction date and 2 years subsequent to that, or construction within 3-year period. Now 54F and 54. A lot of time professionals are confused, or the assessees are confused under these two provisions. 54F is applicable also like individual or HUF only. Other assessees are out. Asset eligible for exemption. There is a mistake here. Any property other than residential house, which is held for long-term period, will be eligible. So suppose you are transferring a commercial property, that will come under the purview of 54F. Amount which is required to be invested is the net sale consideration. Unlike 54, where you had to invest the entire capital gains, here the entire sale consideration itself has to be invested in order to get the benefit. You should, unlike 54, here the condition is that you should not own more than one residential house in India and construct more than one residential house. And similarly is the period, or another period after purchase of this asset also, you should not purchase any new asset. Otherwise, the exemption will be taken away. Time period remains the same. That is not a problem. Now, the tribunals have held that in case the assessee has given the advance to the builder and the builder has not completed the project or the flat, then the assessee cannot bear the brunt of that, and the benefit of deduction under 54F cannot be denied. I have referred to two judgments. One is Karnataka and one is Madras High Court. And once Hyderabad bench recently in the case of Juwaria Begum has also held that even the construction of existing house, reconstruction of existing house or reconstruction, let us say you already have a house and you're creating another floor, you are adding one more floor to that house, then that benefit of reconstruction will also be eligible while you are interpreting section 54 or 54F. A lot of time this query comes whether the sale investment, the reinvestment has to be in the name of the assessee himself, or he can jointly purchase along with his wife. Suppose a property was sold by the husband. Now, husband is himself a senior citizen. He says, I want to buy a property along with my son, so that subsequently there is no transfer issues after my death. Or I want to purchase it along with my wife. She's not giving any consideration as far as the buyer is concerned. So the views have been all favorable to the assessees, that irrespective of the buyers, who has paid the sale consideration is the relevant criteria. If the husband has paid the sale consideration, then he will get the benefit under 54 or 54F. Now, friends, prior to Finance Act 2014, the language under section 54F was a residential house. Now that has been corrected and that has been changed to one residential house. So suppose you are reinvesting. So department, what used to happen is that if assessee has purchased 2 flats or 3 properties, maybe they are adjoining. Let us say there are 3 lands which were purchased by the assessee. The department used to say, no, you are only eligible for one investment. Suppose you are buying flat number F101 and F102 together. The department used to restrict the benefit only to one investment. After Finance Act 2014, the language was changed from a to one. So the courts have consistently held that prior to amendment, there was no such restriction as one. A meant many. So even if there were more than one, even if the flats were not connected to each other, still the benefit under section 54F for reinvestment would be eligible. Now, very interesting judgment of Ahmedabad bench in Muhammad Hanif Sultani is there, where even after the amendment of Finance Act 2014, where by two separate sale deeds, 2 adjoining lands were purchased, the tribunal said that they continue to be treated as one residential house, because the concept of residential house has to be looked in from the eyes of the buyer and not from the purview of the assessing officer. And under the definition of Income Tax Act, no area is prescribed. What is the minimum area or maximum area for a residential house? Even after the amendment of 2014, if the property is contiguous, if the property is analogous, if the property is adjoining, there could be a case where assessee purchases a property at the back side and the front side and demolishes the common wall. It will continue to be given the advantage. Though department is going to make additions, but one can note of this judgment of Ahmedabad Tribunal. And I am not aware about any contrary view till date adopted by the tribunal. Very, very interesting interpretation of section 54F has been adopted by various tribunals, including Jaipur Tribunal, where they say that if the entire sale consideration has been reinvested under section 54F, then 50C is out. So for example, you sell a property falling under 54F for 1 crore, which is adopted by the sub-registrar at 1.5 crore, and you have reinvested the entire 1 crore in purchase of a residential house. And naturally, the assessee will say that I do not have the remaining 50 lakh rupees, which is adopted by the sub-registrar for reinvestment purposes. Now, whether it is Indore bench or Jaipur bench, consistently the view has been taken. If the entire consideration has been reinvested, then section 50C becomes redundant. However, when it came to 54EC, the Bombay High Court in Jagdish Dhavalia has decided against the assessee, and it says 100% reinvestment made or no, not made makes no difference. Value first, you adopt the value of the property as per 50C, and then you reduce under the benefit under section 50C, 54EC. There are two different views when it comes to valuation of taxation under 54F vis-a-vis 54EC. A lot of time, again, this query comes that is it necessary that reinvestment money has to be out of the sale consideration received itself? So that is again now a view which has been consistently been decided in favor of the assessee. Suppose you have received a sale consideration, you invest that sale consideration, let us say, in a partnership firm for some business use or to repay some loan. But when it comes to reinvestment, you take another loan and buy that property. The tribunals have said that no problem, as long as you are reinvesting that money, you will be eligible for benefit under 54 or 54F. It need not be out of that money itself. Friends, 54EC has also undergone certain changes which we need to be updated. Earlier, it was transfer of any capital asset. Now that restriction is only in case the consideration or the capital gains is out of land or building, then only 54EC is available. So if there is a capital gain, let us say out of sale of old jewelry, 54EC is not there anymore. 54EC is only now restricted to land or building. Maximum investment 50 lakh. The period of investment bonds, earlier it used to be 3 years, now it is 5 years. And so, and last and the least important point, and but not that to be ignored, is that 6 months period is to be calculated not from the date of transfer, but from the end of the month in which the sale of the property took place. So suppose your property has been sold on 15th February. Then the reinvestment period is not 15th August, but it is available right up to 31st August. Because 6 calendar months from the end of the month would be available for 54EC. Under the exemptions given by the Government of India, 20th of March, in case your reinvestment period was falling after 20th March, now that benefit is available up to 30th September. So this is fine. I'll again come back to this topic. We are on 12th of October. Another 3 weeks, less than 3 weeks, going for audit. When your family friends ask you what is the status of your audits, what is the status of income tax returns, I'm sure you feel like a Rocky without a gun in your hand. You're just posing your confidence. Yes, things are all doing fine, but we all know what is we are going through. And the branch also holding a talk this stressful time is really fantastic. Friends, when we talk about capital gain, when we talk about deduction under section 54, 54B, 54F, we also need to be aware about capital gain account scheme. It is not necessary that the assessee has to reinvest the money prior to filing of the income tax return. He can reinvest the money. There is timeline available, 3 years for construction, 2 years for purchase. But prior to filing of the income tax return, that money can be kept under the capital gain account scheme. And in case you do not utilize that capital gain account scheme, then in the year when it is maturing, or the 3rd year or the 2nd year, depending on the date of transfer, in that year the tax liability would be there. You can apply to the assessing officer, pay the tax component on payable on that, and the assessing officer can then issue a certificate to the banker to release the payment. And in case there is a death of the assessee, suppose the money is provided by the assessee under capital gain account scheme, and subsequently after 6 months thereafter he dies, then that tax liability need not be discharged by the legal heir. The legal heir is also free, and the person who has died, he is also free. There is a board circular of 96 which grants that relief. And I said capital gain account scheme can be closed with the permission of the assessing officer. If there is any money left there, you can take the permission of the assessing officer, prove to him that the entire tax liability has been paid. And in the final year when this is materializes, then in that year tax liability would be there. Acquisition of goodwill, whether for business or profession or otherwise. Earlier there was a view that it is outside the ambit of taxation. Then thereafter a specific provision from assessment year 17-18 55(2)A has been incorporated, which says that in case of transfer of goodwill or profession, the acquisition cost will be nil. And so whatever you receive as goodwill or transfer of goodwill, the entire amount will be treated as capital gains. There is a very interesting interpretation also in case of rural agricultural land. Now suppose your agricultural land earlier was outside the definition of 214, and thereafter, because of the amendment brought under section 214, where the agricultural land, the distance was narrowed down, and then it becomes a capital asset. One of the very interesting view is that the year in which it becomes the capital asset is the year from which your indexation or the cost of purchase has to be calculated. Until the time it remained as agricultural land, that difference will be outside the purview of taxation. Though it will be out of, there is a question mark on this view, but there is a view that it is being taken. So similarly, if you are having tenancy right, it is, when you sell the tenancy right, it becomes taxable after this amendment of 2017. If you are having adverse possession over a property, that too, if you are selling out, will become part of the long-term capital gain. In case you are transferring a depreciable asset, I'm slightly running out of time, so I'll just try to cover fast. In case you are transferring depreciable asset, then it will be treated as short-term capital gain, though there are a couple of judgments which says that they are not necessary to be treated as short-term or long-term. It will depend on the period of holding. But the broad view is that it will be treated as short-term capital gain. Earlier, there were views where the benefit of 54 EC were also permitted to be given. But anyways, from assessment year 1920, they are all out. Slump sale is a very interesting concept. When the entire undertaking or part of undertaking is being transferred, the department always tries to put or to value individual asset within the slump sale as per the fair market value, and then arrive at the valuation. The consistent view of the honorable courts, even Supreme Court, is that once you are dealing with slump sale, there is a specific definition under 242C, there is a specific head under which it is to be taxed, and individual asset wise calculation cannot be done while you are determining a case of transfer, which is treated as a slump sale. When you are, friends, you are in the shoes of a buyer of a immovable property, we need to inform our clients that there is a section 194 IA, which defines that in case the purchase consideration is more than 50 lakh, one, in case it is purchase of any immovable property other than agricultural land, other than the agricultural land, other than capital asset of 214. So all agricultural lands are not out. Only those agricultural lands which are outside the purview of capital asset, they are out. But the moment any consideration is above 50 lakh rupees, whenever the buyer is making any consideration to the seller, TDS has to be deducted. Whether you are making payment by installment, then by installment you have to deposit it. When you are purchasing it under auction, that time also you are required to deduct deposit, whether you are taking from RICO, RFC, from any organization you are buying a property. The moment it is 50 lakh and above, you have to deduct TDS. But if the seller is an NRI, then 194 IA is out and provisions of 195 will apply. But if the buyer is an NRI, then even the buyer is to comply with the provisions of 194 IA. So seller is out of 194 IA, but buyer is not out of IA. When consideration is less than 50 lakh buyer wise, then provision will not apply. So suppose there are two buyers, the total value of the property is 75 lakh and both the buyers are paying 37 lakh each. So individually they are paying less than 50 lakh. If they are individually paying less than 50 lakh, 194 IA is out. Similarly, if there are two sellers, but buyer is one and individual consideration is less than 50 lakh, both the sellers are receiving 37 and buyer is one, property is one, but there are two separate sellers. Two brothers are selling, let us say 40 lakh each, 194 IA is out. A very recent and very interesting judgment of Shiv Shakti Builders Delhi Tribunal, which has gone on to say, where the buyer is one, please understand this friends, when the buyer is one, the seller is one, but the properties were purchased at three different points of time on piecemeal basis. So registries were different, the property was one, each registry was less than 50 lakh rupees. The tribunal said 194 IA is not applicable because 194 IA has to be looked into each registry wise. And since each registry is less than 50 lakh, the provision is not relevant here. Again, coming back to the stress period of October, if your client reads what are the compliance provisions under TDS, TCS, income tax returns, there are changes in the audit report, even 3CD has been changed, the format for companies, ITR 6, again there is change this year. So it's not an easy task, and coupled with the fact that receiving fees from the client is going to be a Herculean task, it even makes it more difficult. So our life is not going to be easy. We are going to work like a hermit without any possibility of any receipt of any professional fees. That is why even I suggested to the branch that like there is a change of auditor, an NOC requirement is there to be taken from the previous auditor. Similar concept should be brought for non-audit practices as well, at least in this COVID time, where there will be a lot of changes amongst the professional heads. Very, very important topic, retirement of a partner from a partnership firm. Now, two very interesting views. One view is that before retirement, the assets of the retired partnership firm were revalued, and whatever was the revalued assets of the firm, that was credited to the individual partner's capital account. The departments sought that this is a profit on which capital gains / MAT is required to be paid. Now, in the case of Lupin Investment, Bombay Tribunal has held that in case the value of the partnership firm has been revalued, and partner is taking the value which is recorded in its capital account, then neither MAT would be applicable, nor capital gains in the hands of the retiring partner would be applicable. Friends, for example, a partnership firm has a land purchased worth 1 crore. The value of that land today is, let us say, 4 crore. There are two partners. So both the partners revalue that asset from 2 crores to 4 crores. And the capital of both the partners is credited by 1 crore each. And one of the partners then retires. Let us assume another partner comes in. And whatever is the difference is outside the purview of capital gains. But if suppose that asset is not revalued, in the books, the partner's capital is existing, let us say, at 1 crore. And because of the value at which this immovable property was there, the partner receives 2 crore. And there is this profit of 1 crore, which is there to the partners in the case of his retirement. Then in the case of Savitri Kadur, Bangalore bench tribunal has held that right in the partnership firm is a capital asset. And transfer of or retiring whatever is excess amount received from the partnership firm, that will be treated as long-term capital gain. Though you will be eligible for benefit of 54 EC, 54 EC is not there, 1920 onward, but 54F would be there. But as far as taxability is concerned, Bangalore tribunal held that in case you are receiving more as retirement, then you will be liable to pay tax. In case of compulsory acquisition of property under the Fair Compensation and Transparency in Land Acquisition Rehabilitation Settlement Act of 2013, then it is outside the purview of income tax. Even if there is now this is a real classic case. Your client has given a property as a guarantor to his friend. His friend is unable to pay the loan amount. Bank has gone ahead under the SARFAESI Act and taken over the property of your client, who's not even taken the loan. He simply sit as a guarantor. And that property is sought to be auctioned by the bank and set off against this outstanding amount of the loanee. Friends, so whenever your client discusses, or if you are dealing in project finance, there is a discussion with your client, tell him that when you are under normal circumstances, without blinking eye, become a guarantor, give your property as a mortgage to the bank, even without receipt of any consideration, you may end up paying capital gains liability. So be very careful, because the capital gain liability accrues the moment there is a transfer of property. It has nothing to do with receipt of money. So yes, there can be a situation where even without having receipt of money, there is a transfer of property, but you end up paying tax. Shares trading versus investment, I'm sure Bhatia ji is already covered. You can have both portfolios. I am skipping this. 50D is a residual clause under Income Tax Act after 50C CA. That if the value cannot be determined of any asset, then it has its fair market value will be deemed value. I'm sure after hearing me, you would be slightly more puzzled, slightly more unsure. Maybe some issues which you are not aware, I have brought to your knowledge. Or maybe I have been able to successfully clear them. I don't know, but I'm sure whenever it comes to, see friends, you know, under the GST Act, there are direct arrest powers. I represent the department before the High Court. Departmental authorities have direct arrest powers in case of evasion of tax, which is not there under the Income Tax Act. And that is why a lot of time under the Income Tax Act, we take things casually. It should not be so. So be very clear, in times to come, similar powers could be granted to the departmental authorities. I'm coming to my last few slides. Joint Development Agreement. After the Finance Act 18 has been specific provision is provided that the year of taxation will not be the year in which you have entered into the Joint Development Agreement, but the year in which you receive the completion certificate from the competent authority, provided that you have not transferred any property prior to that period. So anything which you have received as sale consideration plus the value determined by the sub-registrar will be deemed value for joint development purposes. There is a celebrated judgment of Supreme Court in the case of Balbir Singh Maini, where they have held that in case the joint development agreement is not registered, then provision of 53A will not be applicable. If 53A is not applicable, then 247 will not apply, 247 will not apply, and the entire tax liability under the chapter capital gain goes in absence of non-registered development agreement. But after amendment of 2001, Registration Act has been amended and has been made mandatory to register the development agreement. Now, dealing with capital assets, capital gains, there will be facts, there will be law. At some point of time, law may be inside of your assessee. Facts may not appear to be so strong, and it could be vice versa. So whatever advice you give to the client, give a balanced view. Don't hesitate to ask any senior, any colleague in case of doubt. In case of doubt, never ever hesitate to question. And in the case of development agreement, in case the developer is paying any consideration other than the security deposit, he has to deduct 10%. And coming to the last trend, it's a ignorance of law. There's no excuse. And more so in case of capital gains, where there are deeming fictions involved. There could be a deeming fiction, there could be associated deeming fiction, there could be deeming fictions within the deeming fiction. As I've just shared, there are two different provisions in case of an asset introduced into a partnership firm. TC also is there, 45.3 is also there. In case of charitable trust, TC is there, 11.1A is there. In case of private limited companies, MAT provisions are also there, 50C is also there. So be very clear. It is hardly any time where we can say that ignorance of law is an excuse. Ignorance of law is a self-goal, which will end up in major challenges. And I will just say thanks to the entire organizing team of Jaipur branch, especially its chairman Anil Yadav, Deepak Khitan, everybody who has given me this chance. I hope I have been able to justify the topic assigned to me. Being a student of law, I always assume that fellow professionals are definitely aware about the basic principles. I am just touching upon the finer developments which have recently come into light. Yeah. And in case I have missed out, please feel free to question me, or even if case I have something wrong is there, just update me as well. Thank you, Anil. Thank you, Deepak ji.
Thank you, sir. Nice session. Thank you, sir.
दीपक जी, कोई क्वेरीज आपके पास आई हो तो
सर एक क्वेरी सर सीधा सर मैंने आपको फॉरवर्ड की है, सर रीड आउट कर।
There is a query which has been sent to me that I am referring to various judgments of tribunals and High Court, but generally the assessing officers or the CIT appeals put it in trash. We do not give any weightage to them. Friends, I would say that this is an opportunity, a godsend opportunity, and even if there is a favorable view of other tribunals and High Court, you do your hard work, identify any judgment, give it to the ITO, give it to the CIT appeal, and CIT appeal says, no. You give me Jaipur Tribunal, you give me Rajasthan High Court. If you give them Jaipur Tribunal, they will say, no, there is one Kerala High Court which is in favor of the revenue. This is natural reaction. But we should not take that too much into mind. They are indirectly or directly helping you. You will go to the next ladder. Another check of professional fees will come to you. Your personality development before the higher authority will be chance given to you to express your hard work. And also remember one more thing. It's a settled principle of law that only jurisdictional High Court, the assessing officer is bound by the jurisdictional High Court and tribunal. And if he's ignoring the non-jurisdictional High Court, he's not doing something which is he cannot do. Courts by various judgment permit him to do so. Because they are permitted to do so, they take undue advantage of that. But all I can say is that there is a grievance committee also of the income tax department, headed by the various commissioners. In case there is a genuine case where you feel that there are 2-3 orders which have already come to light of tribunals, different tribunals, or maybe even of High Court, and even still then tribunals are not, the assessing officer is not giving any weightage, or he's trying to, you can bring it to their knowledge. There cannot be any doubt. Assessing officers cannot move away from their mindset of being tax gatherers. And until unless that tax gathering mindset is not taken away, we will face this music. But I am sure Anil is going to must have organized already a talk on faceless assessment and faceless appellate proceedings. Now, what is interesting is now this faceless assessment and faceless appellate proceeding directly or indirectly makes this jurisdiction concept redundant. So suppose your jurisdictional assessing officer, territorial jurisdictional assessing officer is Ward 11, but your faceless assessing officer is based in Nagpur, or let us say Bangalore, and there is a Bangalore view which is in your favor, which he is also aware, and you are citing that. He is not aware about Jaipur tribunal, contrary view. He may end up giving you benefit. Same is the case of CIT appeals. Now there are going to be 2 CIT appeal. One would be sitting in Calcutta, one would be sitting in Chandigarh. Let us see, it's an interesting development. Chandigarh High Court could be in favor of the SSC, Calcutta Tribunal or High Court could be in favor of the revenue. There could be 2 contrary views. So law is always developing. That is why professionals requirement is there. And so don't take it to heart that they do not give it any weightage, because when you go to the tribunal, believe me, my friend, when you go to the tribunal and you go to the CIT appeal and say, see, sir, I cited this judgment before the assessing officer, and he has not given any reason why this judgment is not applicable, then it becomes a very good point in your, you can then say he is completely ignored. And then tribunals do give value to these. Another query is urban agricultural land sale agreement in 2016. Sale deed in September 19, land purchase in February 19 in the name of son, out of sale proceed. Can deduction? Yes. In case you have reinvested in the name of the, before 1 year in the case of son, I have already cited some judgments. You can take advantage of that. In case there is any reinvestment, no problem. In case of son, provided the sale consideration has gone from the bank account of the father. Its capital gain has to be deposited, or sale consideration has to be deposited in capital gains bank account. Friends, depending whether you're eligible for deduction under 54F or you are eligible under deduction under 54, the quantum would be dependent on that. Suppose you have transferred a residential house, then your reinvestment will be in the shape of 54. In case it is 54, then whatever is the capital gain amount, only that has to be deposited under the capital gain account scheme, not the entire sale consideration. But if it is a case of 54 falling under 54F, let us assume you have not done any investment under 54EC, then you, in that situation, you will have to deposit the sale consideration. So depending under which head you are getting the advantage, according to that, the capital gain has to be determined. NRI taxation, I think that's Deepak.
हाँ वो गलत आ गया सर, एक्चुअली इज नॉट दैट क्वेरी. वो कल का टॉपिक कोई पूछ रहा था तो उसमें चला गया
जी.
हाँ, एक सर ये सुभाष जोशी सर है, ये कुछ पूछ रहे हैं. एक बार
उनको वीडियो ऑन कर दो उनका.
शिवाजी आपका ऑप्शन भी नहीं आ रहा है, ऑडियो का भी और वीडियो का भी।
दोनों ऑप्शन नहीं आ रहे सर उनके।
लॉग आउट हो गए होंगे।
और एक पर्सन और थे सर,
प्रेजेंट
गणेश मीडिया।
शिवाजी आपका ऑप्शन नहीं आ रहा है कुछ भी, या तो आप वापस से एक बार रिज्वाइन करें, या आप एक काम करें चैट बॉक्स का एक सर यस सर पूछिए।
देखिए नुपुर जी का मैसेज है कि शेयर योर पीपीटी, आई विल प्रोवाइड इट टू यू। आप वैसे तो आप यूट्यूब पे भी अपलोड करेंगे, अपने वेबसाइट पे, ब्रांच की वेबसाइट पे भी अपलोड होती है, इंडिविजुअली पार्टिसिपेंट्स को चली जाएगी।
जी सर
पूछिए सर, अनम्यूट हो गए हैं आप सर। ये नाम तो आपका आ नहीं रहा इसमें, IN35 आई थिंक मोबाइल नंबर आ रहा है आपका। सर आवाज आ रही है सर आपको?
वाह सर,
ये तो विजयकांत जी हैं।
कुछ पूछना है सर आपको? सर रेज हैंड किया था आपने।
आई थिंक अनिल वी आर नॉट एबल टू गेट इट।
ठीक है सर।
फ्रेंड्स अगर और भी किसी की क्वेरी है तो प्लीज आप अभी पूछ लीजिए, और इनकेस अगर आपको ऐसा लगता है कि अभी कोई क्वेरीज आप पीपीटी देखने के बाद या वापस से कोई माइंड के अंदर आती है तो आप प्लीज जयपुर ब्रांच से शेयर कर लीजिए, और सिद्धार्थ विहार से हम रिक्वेस्ट करके, क्योंकि हम बहुत परेशान करते रहे सिद्धार्थ विहार को, तो फिर से परेशान करके क्वेरी का रिप्लाई आपसे सब लोगों से ले लेंगे। तो आई थिंक मेरे हिसाब से सब क्वेरीज सर कवर हो गई हैं, कोई अभी आ नहीं रही है।
जी फाइन।
एंड थैंक यू सर, थैंक यू सो मच। आपका मतलब जो प्यार है जयपुर ब्रांच के लिए, पूरे मेंबर्स के लिए, तो आप हमेशा जो अवेलेबिलिटी है आपकी और जो सिंपलिसिटी है आपकी सर, आपकी प्रोफाइल को देखते हुए थैंक्स यू सो मच सर।
डोंट एम्बैरेस मी, आई एम पार्ट ऑफ यू ओनली।
सर और थैंक्स दीपक जी, थैंक यू सो मच, आप मुझे टाइम दे रहे हैं। और थैंक यू सुरेश जी भाई साहब, आई थिंक सुरेश जी भाई साहब को निकलना पड़ेगा कहीं पे। थैंक्स टू ऑल, और आगे भी हमें उम्मीद है सर सिद्धार्थ भी आपका भी टाइम लेते रहेंगे, दीपक जी आपका भी टाइम लेते रहेंगे, और सुरेश भाई साहब का भी टाइम लेते रहेंगे। थैंक्स टू ऑल फ्रेंड्स। अगर आपकी फिर भी कोई क्वेरी बचती है तो प्लीज आप हमें चैट बॉक्स के ऊपर भी डाल सकते हैं, इवन आप जयपुर ब्रांच पे मेल भी कर सकते हैं, और जो भी पीपीटी है वो जयपुर ब्रांच की वेबसाइट पे हम लोग अपलोड कर देंगे। यूट्यूब के ऊपर थोड़ा सा टाइम लगेगा हमें अपलोड करने के ऊपर, जयपुर ब्रांच के यूट्यूब चैनल पे। मीनवाइल आप जो पहले की वीडियोस हैं, सिद्धार्थ भैया के भी हैं पहले के, तो वो जब तक आप देखें जयपुर ब्रांच के चैनल को सब्सक्राइब करें। और आफ्टर ये जो 7 डेज की पाठशाला है, देन वी आर ट्राइंग कि जैसे हमारे पास सेक्रेटरी हैं शैलेंद्र अग्रवाल जी, उनका एक बहुत अच्छा आइडिया था, बोला सर आप एक काम करें, जितने भी वीडियोस हैं, जितने भी टॉपिक है, एक्सेल की शीट बना के सबको मेल कर दीजिए। एक टॉपिक का नेम आ जाएगा, स्पीकर का नेम आ जाएगा, और आगे यूट्यूब लिंक आ जाएगा, तो किसी को कभी कोई टॉपिक सर्च करना हो तो वो कर देंगे। तो हम उसके ऊपर वर्किंग कर रहे हैं, थोड़े से आई थिंक 4 to 5 डेज लगेंगे। देन व्हाट वी विल डू कि उसका एक लिंक हम जयपुर ब्रांच की वेबसाइट पे भी डाल देंगे, तो जिससे अगर आप कोई भी टॉपिक सर्च करना है तो टॉपिक स्पीकर्स आप सर्च कर लें, और क्लिक जैसे उस लिंक के ऊपर क्लिक करेंगे तो यूट्यूब पे डायरेक्ट वो आपको ले जाएगा। थैंक यू सर, थैंक्स टू ऑल,
थैंक यू वेरी मच।
थैंक्स।
थैंक यू।